world leaders and great minds gather, it's time to ponder and chart the course amid the chill of global changes. See the spring of openness and the blossoming of innovation. World Insights host Tian Wei brings you fresh views and meaningful talks on site. Tune in to World Insight for its special coverage on the Boao Forum for Asia Annual Conference 2018.
Hello and welcome to a special edition of World Insight, coming to you from Boao here in Hainan on the Boao Forum for Asia. I'm Tian Wei. Coming up on today's program, our exclusive one-on-one interview with Ban Ki-moon, the new chair of the Boao Forum. Followed up by an exclusive interview with Fang Xinghai, the vice chairman of the China Securities Regulatory Commission, and our discussion about openness and innovation from Boao for China and the world.
Wider market access, a more friendly business environment, enhanced efforts in protecting intellectual property rights, and an expansion on import trade flows. Those were the four major new policies unveiled by the Chinese president at the Boao Forum for Asia. Xi Jinping said that since the country's opening up and reform in 1978, remarkable progress has made in China's economic and social development. He pointed out that the nation has gradually become a stabilizer and propeller of global growth and development.
China has grown into the world's second largest economy, the largest industrial producer, the largest trader of goods, and the holder of the largest foreign exchange reserve.
President Xi said a number of landmark measures will be launched to significantly broaden market access. These include raising foreign equity caps in the banking, securities, and insurance industries. The automobiles, ships, and aircraft sectors are also set to open up. President Xi also said that China will become more attractive for foreign investors.
The investment environment is like air, and only fresh air attracts more investment from the outside. China relied mainly on providing favorable policies to foreign investors in the past, but now we will have to rely more on improving the investment environment. We will enhance alignment with international economic and trading rules, increase transparency, strengthen intellectual property protection, uphold the rule of law, encourage competition, and oppose monopoly.
Xi Jinping outlined that the protection of the intellectual property rights provides the biggest boost to enhancing the competitiveness of the Chinese economy. He added that the country will work hard to import more products that are desired by Chinese consumers.
You're watching World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. I'm here in Boao. The Boao Forum for Asia has wrapped up today. On this occasion, we have an exclusive one-on-one interview with Mr. Ban Ki-moon, the former Secretary General of the United Nations, now the new chair of the Boao Forum. Let's listen in as to what he has to say about the future of this forum and some of the most important securities as well as economic issues of the world. Mr. Chairman, what a pleasure to see you here in Boao.
Thank you. 谢谢.
Tell me about your vision for Boao Forum from now on.
The Asia and whole world are now changing rapidly. I hope we are moving ahead toward a better course, a better direction. But it is also true that there are many regional conflict issues, still poverty issues, and economic prosperity, economic benefits are not evenly, fairly distributed. In that regard, my chairmanship assumption at this critical time has a lot of meanings and implications. I feel a sense of heavy responsibility because the Asia has been taking a greater leadership, particularly with the Chinese economic growth, and Chinese are taking greater leadership role in the world. Now, with the 40 years of reform and opening up of China, now I believe that China is also entering into a new era of further opening up, wide opening up, and reform.
But at the same time, we also know that there is a debate about so-called incumbent power, rising power issue. How do you, as chairman of Boao Forum, try to balance this region with the rest of the world in the agenda, in the discussion, and also in your activities?
Connectivity and mutual cooperation and partnership is much, much more important than domination by a certain country over another, or seeking some other way of some undesirable partnerships. I was very much struck and inspired by President Xi Jinping's statement yesterday. He said that China is going to broaden and widen their contributions to the international community by broadening the market access. There have been some criticism and concerns about the financial market in China, and he is also broadening this all insurance markets to China. Then he again said that he is committed to create some attractive environmental atmosphere for China. That means that China is committed to play by the rule of law, transparency and accountability and accessibility. This is a very good statement. And then, of course, he promised that he will try to protect the intellectual property rights, and also he will increase the import from other countries. Those 4 points is a manifestation and demonstration of self-confidence as well as a strong commitment to work together with the world at large.
You come into the position at a critical time, as you mentioned earlier. Also at a critical time when the regional peace and stability is facing a critical juncture. For example, the DPRK issue. As formerly the Secretary General of the United Nations and now chairman of the Boao Forum for Asia, I'm sure this topic will come up all the time. Mr. Chairman, what is your assessment of all the latest developments and the tangles between countries and among countries?
Countries in this region have been trying to reach out to others and trying to promote regional integration. At the same time, how to address peace and security issues, that is also very important. We have a long-standing, very worrisome situation still persisting in Asia, particularly surrounding Korean Peninsula. With the forthcoming South and North Summit meeting and also U.S.-North Korean Summit meeting in May, we sincerely hope that this will really create much more favorable atmosphere in this part of the world, particularly surrounding Korean Peninsula.
Do you think at this point sanctions should be discussed against the DPRK, and meanwhile the military exercises should be discussed between the U.S. and South Korea? And at the same time, should there be a timetable for the denuclearization be discussed between North Korea and some of the other players, let's just say, of the previous six-party talks? These are very specific issues.
It is in fact separate issues. The sanction itself on North Korea was not to punish North Korea. It is a strong will of international community to show that the members of the United Nations should behave and properly conduct their way of life in international affairs. Those sanctions were imposed because of North Korea's violation by testing nuclear weapons 6 times since 2006, and the numerous launches of ballistic missiles, including intercontinental ballistic missiles. Therefore, it may not be fair to just put together in the same track as a way of bargaining chips. What is important at this time, the North Korean nuclear weapons and its development programs must be dismantled in a complete and verifiable and irreversible way. What we term it as a CVID, complete, verifiable, irreversible dismantlement. This is a very important issue. It's not only an issue of North Korea to China or South Korea. It's a global issue for global peace and security. While the joint military exercises has always been a defensive purpose, no country has ever raised any objection except North Korea. I sincerely hope that the South-North Summit will really be a successful one, which can make a good groundwork, preparatory groundwork for U.S. and North Korean summit meeting. I sincerely hope that it is a genuine commitment which will be discussed and agreed upon by South Korean talks with the South Korean leaders and with the U.S. President.
That's Ban Ki-moon, the former UN Secretary General and now the newly elected chair of the Boao Forum for Asia. Coming up on our program, an exclusive interview with Fang Xinghai, the Vice Chair of China's Securities Regulatory Commission, about China's openness in the financial sector and what are the new policies coming up.
When world leaders and great minds gather, it's time to ponder and chart the course. Amid the chill of global changes, see the spring of openness and the blossoming of innovation. World Insights host Tian Wei brings you fresh views and meaningful talks on site. Tune in to World Insight for its special coverage on the Boao Forum for Asia Annual Conference 2018.
You're watching World Insight. I'm here in Boao for the Boao Forum for Asia. On the occasion of the Boao Forum, we had a one-on-one exclusive interview with Fang Xinghai. One of the reasons for that is very clear. That is, Chinese President Xi Jinping at the opening ceremony of Boao Forum has pledged reform and opening up measures and policies regarding the financial sector. Mr. Fang, as the Vice Chair of the China Securities Regulatory Commission, has explained to me what are the details of these policies and what's likely to be the timeline of implementation.
Once they're implemented, the Chinese financial sector will be much stronger, much more vibrant, and much more international. And if we continue on that direction, I think China's financial sector has the capability to change the landscape of the world financial market.
There is the so-called increasing the equity gap and also opening of more space for the international financial institutions, opening up the insurance industry, and many of the others. But the question is, how fast? What pace? What are the barometers? What is the timeline?
I know this is something that a lot of international firms are very concerned with. As the President said, what we promised last November when President Trump came to Beijing would be implemented in full by the end of this year. So this is a firm timeline. And as far as the CSRC, which I work for, is concerned, we will implement what we promised by the end of June. Now, the President also said that China would open up in insurance more and in capital markets more. And you just stay tuned.
He used the exchanges with the foreign capital market.
That's right, yeah. So you just stay tuned. Concrete measures, again with timeline, will be announced very soon.
We have heard from many foreign financial institutions that they are very excited about the news. Of course, at the same time, some of them have a bit sense of cynicism because they thought they have heard news about it earlier. So I guess the question is not only communication, but also transparency, leading up to the real eventual implementation and result. So what is likely to be the step-by-step transparency revealing to the outside world what we are doing and how we are doing it?
You mentioned some outside observers and international firms. We're kind of little disappointed about sort of slow progress, right? Now, to be fair, I think they have a point. We did move. It's not true that we did not move at all.
We did
During
move.
the past few years, we did move, right? So, for example, in my area, originally a foreign firm can only own 33% of a JV securities firm. A few years ago, we increased that percentage to 49%, right? But of course, 49 is not enough because they are still not in control. And then we announced last November that we would increase it to 51%. And then in 3 years' time, it will be 100%. So we are making progress, but I agree that we could have done it a little bit faster. But to the second point of your question, 2018 will be an eventful year for China's financial sector. And the president said, very perceptively, he said, history always has a way to concentrate a lot of events into 1 year, and that year would be a standout year. I think 2018 would be such a year.
This year. So you're already rolling up your sleeves, huh?
That's true.
Work harder,
And,
as the president said.
Stay tuned. There will be a lot more coming.
But Mr. Fang, when we are talking about the efficiency and the speed of reform, on the other hand, we should also talk about the stability and the safety of China's financial systems, because you also have a goal. So how can we, on the one hand, making sure of the speed, the reform itself, on the other hand, don't forget our original goal either. So that's quite a balance.
You're very right. I mean, as we open up, as we innovate in the financial sector, stability is always another goal that we keep in our mind.
Particularly if you have more opening up.
It goes both ways. Sometimes when you open up, you bring in a certain element of risk. On the other hand, when you open up, actually brings in stability as well, because you bring in more capital, for example, and that increases stability. You bring in more sophisticated practices, and that brings in stability. But of course, you also bring in a lot of speculative, perhaps, activities that will increase the risk. So we always make sure that the financial sector in China can progress in a stable way. And I think we are very well positioned to achieve stability in China because, as you know well, our government is a quite strong government. We take preventative, preemptive actions in a timely manner, right? And also in a way that is quite decisive.
Right.
So if you look at the past 40 years, for example, China is perhaps the only developing country that has completely avoided a big financial crash. I mean, we have instabilities, we have jitteries, but we have avoided financial crash. And I think that is not a small achievement.
With the institutional reform, of course, security is still on the one hand, but on the other hand, the banking and insurance are being put together.
Yes.
So what would this mean? Particularly, for example, Mr. Fang, your relationship with your colleague from the banking and the insurance areas.
I think the new structure of financial regulation is clearer than before. In regulation, you regulate basically two things: financial markets and then financial institutions. And with banking and insurance putting together, the regulation of financial institutions, financial firms, are a lot more integrated. So you can erase, the regulatory gap between these different institutions. The CSRC has been kept intact, I would say, because our original task was to regulate financial markets, and that remains our task.
Well, China reform and opening up, as President Xi said, 40 years anniversary, this is a big year. And you said yourself earlier, this is going to be an eventful. I think that has a lot to do with the 40 years.
Yes.
But the question is, at the very beginning, we got the guts.
Back in 78.
Back in 78, right? We had nothing. And we had nothing to lose. But now we've got a lot compared to what we had before, of course. So do we still have the guts?
And that's a good point. When you were very poor, you tend to be very revolutionary. You had nothing to lose, as you said.
You want to try everything, and you can try everything.
Now you are quite well off, right? And you have a lot of achieved results already. You don't want to waste all of them, right? So that's right. We got to be thinking more, right? Planning ahead in a more careful way. Remember, President Xi said one of the features of our reform and opening up over the last 40 years was that, on one hand, we cross the river by touching the stone. On the other hand, we also do this overall planning, right, for reform. And that is very much a feature of our reforms. And I think going forward, the kind of top-down, careful planning would be a lot more important than, say, 40 years ago, right? Now, as we proceed in a more careful way, on the other hand, we also have a lot more resources at our disposal than 40 years ago, right? So we can do a lot of bigger things today than we used to be able to do.
What are the bigger things you are having in mind?
Well, I mean, just give you one example. And 40 years ago, we did not even have a securities market, right? And the market was only established about 28 years ago, right? Now, our markets, whether it's the stock market or the commodity futures market or the bond market, are already among number 2 and number 3 in the world. So our size is very big, and it's increasing, every day. So we are very attractive to the rest of the world. So, we can use that huge size of the market to attract a lot of institutional investors to come to China. This is something that we could not do many years ago.
But China also wants to emphasize that the market will play a decisive role.
Of course.
On the other hand, China has a very strong government.
Of course.
And the government could put out measures that will be quote-unquote attractive to the international investors or to domestic firms to be listed here in China. So how do you see that, an advantage or disadvantage?
I would think if we can play the role of the government well, it's an advantage, right?
To you, what is quote-unquote well?
The government has to be very wise. You cannot intervene all the time, right? And you have to intervene in a wise way. And when you do it in a wise way, first of all, you can maintain stability, which is very important for the financial sector. And secondly, you can coordinate the different forces in the society and the system to make certain big reform and opening up happen, right? In a lot of countries, for example, reforms are very difficult, right? Because the different branches of the government, they are kind of interlocked with each other. They cannot move, whereas it's not the case in China. But on the other hand, we also want to make sure that government is like the big brother. Right? It does not overplay its hand. And in President Xi's speech, there's one sentence which is very, very important in my view. And he said we should not force other people to buy or force other people to sell. And I thought that was very, very perceptive and very much needed at this point. Because China is so big, right? If we always play, the force that plays our size, right? And force other people to buy or sell, they have to do it. But that's not the best way to open up.
But I wondered, whether within your circle of friends and colleagues, you have to debate about this all the time. I mean, it's easy if you use administrative measures. You got things done very quickly. You seem to have a great result within a small period of time. But of course, the long-term impact, it is another issue.
Yes.
But I wondered whether people know it very well, particularly when they have short-term interests or goals they have to achieve. So this long-term and short-term, always a struggle, I would assume, Mr. Fang.
That's right. I mean, there's always this trade-off between long-term and short-term.
Do you have fierce debate?
Well, it's not very much manifested in internal debates. Usually, people make that kind of trade-off, in a unspoken way, I would say. Right? That's how bureaucracy operates. But the good thing about our system is that, we have one ruling party, right, that is in power for a long time, and President Xi certainly is a very long-term thinker, right? And he cares about the long-term interest of the country. Right. So at that level, we do have a very long-term goal, and that makes this short-term, long-term trade-off very much in favor of the long-term outcome.
Having said that, though, Mr. Fang, I do have one question also related to the latest development between China and the United States. Yes. Of course, it is a trade conflict. It's not necessarily related to your field, and yet it has a connection to your field. We see the turbulence going on in the international markets.
It has.
On the other hand, if the two economies, the biggest in the world, are not necessarily seeing eye to eye to one another, there's going to be big problem in the financial markets. So, Mr. Fang, what do you make of the latest? Did I hear
when some country announces certain tariffs, you notice that the financial markets of that country actually got hammered.
Absolutely.
Very much. So I guess the lesson is clear that in this very interconnected world, things go both ways, right? And you have to be very careful about the negative impact on your own economy when you try to hit another economy. So best way to resolve these disputes is through negotiation.
But there is financial risks, as we say.
Well, of course,
how can you avoid, if you are thinking the long term, if the other party want to pick up a fight, how can you avoid and think prehand about preventing the risks?
Well, you make your...
That's the Chinese goal, isn't it?
I mean, there are always two ways.
You play the chess and you think about that way.
Well, there's always, so two aspects, to this question. One is that you do communicate with the other side in the advanced, in much earlier, right, in a proactive way to make sure that you understand each other. But sometimes, not all the communications can work out, right? So if there's a real fight, then you get very well prepared. So for example, in the financial sector, you make sure your financial system is robust, right? Can withstand certain outside shocks. If your financial sector is very much fragile, for example, if asset prices is very high, there's a lot of bubble, then you cannot withstand that kind of shock. So make sure that your system is stable.
So make sure your own things is
that you're very prepared. Yeah, prepared. If you have to fight, then you have to fight.
That's the best way to do it. Mr. Fang, what a pleasure to see you here in Boao.
Good to be here.
Thank you so much, sir, for sharing your time.
Good luck to CGTN.
Thank you so much, sir.
Sure.
That's Fang Xinghai, Vice Chair of the China Securities Regulatory Commission, talking to us about the latest in China's open-up policies regarding the financial sector. You're watching World Insight coming to you from Boao, our special focus on the Boao Forum for Asia. We'll be back after this. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei, coming to you from Boao here for the Boao Forum on Asia. Earlier, we had our policymakers talking about the policies regarding international issues as well as financial sectors. Now let's listen in to an earlier conversation I had with two scholars about China's openness and innovation.
When world leaders and great minds gather, it's time to ponder and chart the course. Amid the chill of global changes, see the spring of openness and the blossoming of innovation. World Insights host Tian Wei brings you fresh views and meaningful talks on site. Tune in to World Insight for its special coverage on the Boao Forum for Asia Annual Conference 2018.
Now I'm joined in the special program by Nicholas Lardy, Senior Fellow with the Peterson Institute coming from the U.S. Welcome, Mr. Lardy.
Thank you.
And also Mr. Yang Xiyu, Senior Fellow with the China Institute of International Studies. Welcome as well, Mr. Yang.
Thank you.
We are here in Boao. This is about openness. This is about innovation, this year's Boao Forum. And important political speeches have been made about these points. The question is, what about the next? This year, China, 40 years of reform and opening up. This is a big moment. Will the country and will the rest of the world be able to rally about this idea about further reform? Mr. Lardy, your observation.
Well, I think President Xi has been very clear, starting at his speech at Davos 2 years ago, that China is very committed to continuing to open up and reform domestically, internationally, and I think that's been very well received in the rest of Asia. And the United States looks like a bit of an outlier at this point in terms of pulling back from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, saying negative things about the WTO, and this very strong America First agenda of President Trump.
People have been talking about every country these days needs their own version, like China's reform and opening up, because they have their own problems when it comes to economy and also politics. And Mr. Lardy, do you think that the United States also needs something like that? Similar remedy or different, but certainly interesting in nature?
No, I agree with you. I think China does serve as a model. The opening up of China over the last 40 years has been a major contributor to China's economic success. The United States is relatively open already, but the risk is we're closing down. We're putting on more restrictions on inbound investment. Maybe we're going to put more restrictions on imports. So I do think we need to recalibrate our relationship with the global economy to be more open, engage in more trade liberalization, and continue to be a very open investment environment.
How is China going to recalibrate, if I could use that verb as well, the momentum of reform and pushing the whole country really in the one direction?
Well, we are going to the reform from the touch the stone, step by step, going to the reform guided by the comprehensive design and the plan, strategic plan. That is the totally, that is the substantive difference between the reform 1.0 to reform 2.0.
Bilateral trade issues between China and the United States. What is your latest assessment of where we are going?
Well, I think it's very difficult to assess because we see some tactics on both sides, but the bottom line, particularly for the United States, has not yet been clarified. So it's hard to judge exactly where we're going.
Yeah, earlier we heard from the Chinese president, and we also read some latest tweets coming from U.S. President Donald Trump. If it is something that you can trust, I mean the tweet, what would you say?
Well, I think that President Trump tweets about a lot of things. Sometimes he changes his mind. Sometimes he forgets what he said before. So it may be more tactics than strategy.
Not necessarily a reliable source when it comes to the results.
Sometimes it is, and a few times it isn't.
Here's the thing, Mr. Lardy. The U.S. is not only facing a so-called trade surplus issue with China, but also with Germany and some of the other economies. So the question is, at this stage of development, the U.S. probably has to choose that road. There's no other options.
Well, you're absolutely right. The U.S. has been running a global deficit for a long time. We have a shortfall of savings relative to investment, so we have to borrow from the rest of the world. And to borrow from the rest of the world, they have to sell more to us than we buy from them. And so if you really want to get at this issue, you have to deal with the underlying saving investment imbalance in the United States. It can't be addressed by trying to reconfigure a bilateral trade relationship.
So how sophisticated do you think the politics will get regarding this issue leading up to the midterm election, Mr. Lardy?
Well, I think there are a lot of people in the administration that don't really understand that the underlying problem is not trade protectionism in China or any other country. It's a problem that's really domestic within our own economy, and if we want to address it, we need to do something about our domestic low level of savings. This is a very complicated thing, though, to explain to the American electorate, and a lot of politicians want to campaign just on pointing fingers at other countries.
You have seen the team that President Trump has been building recently over the past few weeks. You see TV personalities being incorporated as the economic advisor, and also policies back in the 1970s, last century, being exercised, for example, using tariffs in a trade dispute. So will these tactics and the means really get to the United States to where it wants to be, Mr. Lardy?
I don't think tariffs is the right approach to where we want to go.
The good news is China has determined to take a much bolder opening up policy. That will be helpful to rebalance the U.S.-China, not only U.S.-China, but China, India, many other countries balance trade. But on the other hand, I think through the disputes, not war, through disputes, the U.S. and China relation will get more matured than before. Both of the capitals will be wiser than before to deal with, sophisticated, sensitive issues.
Let's deal with some of the key words you just mentioned, Mr. Yang. One is about the bilateral relations getting more matured. That is the word you've just been using. So many wonder, Mr. Yang, whether this so-called trade war, will it be only the starting point of further interest conflict between China and the United States that is so obvious to the rest of the world, and it will be presented on the surface to the rest of the world? Mr. Yang.
Well, let me put it back this way. I use the term mature because President Trump, President Xi Jinping are very smart. They have a political wisdom. They know exactly which route is a benefit for his and his country. On South China Sea issue, the disputes remain very sharp. So the picture is very mixed. So some part is good, some part is bad. What we need to do is just enlarge and expand the good part, and to
find a common ground in a way.
By common ground, and limit the bad part. That is the task for both of the leaders.
Can they do that, Mr. Lardy?
Well, I certainly think there's an opportunity in this window of negotiation that I just mentioned. We'll have to see whether both sides can take advantage of it to reach a satisfactory solution.
If you look at Steve Bannon, who used to serve in the administration, the articles he wrote and also the speeches he's given about the U.S. stance strategically toward China, obviously you don't see a positive picture as Mr. Yang just described. So, Mr. Lardy, what is your judgment here? Is this only the beginning of something much more serious, fight, obvious to the rest of the world, or this is going to be a small experiment between the two to see how they can tangle with better steps?
Well, I hope it's going to turn out to be a small experiment, but we'll have to wait and see.
The hope is one thing, the reality is another thing, Mr.
Yes,
Lardy.
but remember, as we're talking about a trade war, it hasn't really started yet.
Not yet.
The big tariffs that President Trump has proposed won't go into effect until June at the earliest, and it may be significantly after that. So there's a significant window of opportunity for the two sides to have a discussion, negotiation, and lead to a favorable outcome that would maybe put the relationship on a more stable basis.
That is only about the two sides, but also inside the United States, in your society, there are a lot of interest groups, of course, agricultural business, the car industry, the planes. And how much do you think they will have their input into the overall discussion? Will they, in a way, or in any way, shape the conversation?
Oh, I think they're already shaping the conversation, and what we're seeing is a lot of pushback against the tariff approach that the president has proposed. And it's the agricultural groups, almost all the manufacturing groups are all pointing out that there's a big downside to what has been proposed by the administration. I think there's a lot of pushback that the administration is already feeling, and it will get much worse over the next several weeks as various industries and groups have an opportunity to make a case that their products should not be on the tariff list.
For now, I want to thank the two of you, Nicholas Lardy, Yang Xiyu. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. All the best. That is my earlier conversation with two scholars coming from China and the United States regarding the geopolitical issue as well as many of the trade and economic issues going on between the two countries. And with that, we are wrapping up this special edition of our program from Boao on World Insight. In fact, this is the last edition of our special program from Boao. On behalf of my team here in Boao and in Beijing, I'm bidding you goodbye. If you want to find us, try to find us on YouTube and also social platforms, Facebook, Twitter, as well as Sina Weibo. I'm Tian Wei. See you next time from Beijing.